Well, thanks for joining today, Alex. How are you doing?
Yeah, very well. Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
That's all fine. So in this podcast, we're going to talk about your physio career with advice for students looking for their first job or going into their first job, as well as physios who are looking to progress in their career as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Perfect. So yeah, if you could bring us back to your beginnings, really.
Okay. So I'm originally from Greece. This is where I studied to become a physiotherapist. I graduated in 2014. And my first job was in Greece. I worked at a private practice there, but I knew that I wanted to come to the UK really to work in the NHS. Because the NHS has a great reputation overseas. So I wanted to do that, and me and my partner wanted to come here and work. So I did my HPC application, my international application, which took some time, like 4 months or so. And then when that came through, I was still working in a private practice in Greece. So this is in Athens. Private practice, had initial experience with a little bit of, I guess, all sorts of conditions. It wasn't really one specialty or the other. It was just a bit of everything. But which is, I think, what I needed in order to get that initial confidence after graduation. Um, and then when that came through, we moved to the UK. And what was interesting is that, well, at the time, this is pre-Brexit, so I could move to the UK with my EU citizenship with no need for a visa or anything.
Mhm.
Um, and when I first moved, what is interesting is that I didn't move having a job in the UK. I just had a little bit of money in the bank, and I just moved over. Um, and me and my wife had a job, so that was good because she could pay the rent. And in the meantime, I had some time to kind of look around. So that's how it started, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how long were you looking around for before you landed that first role?
Yeah. So I took a little bit of time intentionally just to kind of, gather myself after I moved over.
Yeah.
And then I started doing sending out some applications through specifically for NHS jobs for a band 5 role, which is, as we know, like the first, I guess, qualified level of employment that you can have as a physio. Um, I was lucky, I think, at the time. It didn't take me that long. It was about 3 months, if I remember correctly, like around 2016. Where I sent out these applications through Track, and I got a couple of interviews. The first one didn't go amazingly well. I think what I was missing is also that experience of the UK health and care system. So a lot of the questions that came my way, almost at the time to me felt like they were outside of my scope because I was used to I guess the Greek way of doing things. But I learned from that quite quickly, and I kind of expanded and I read a bit. And then after 2 or 3 months, I had an interview with a particular trust, a hospital, where I got an offer for a band 5 role, and it was my first offer, and I didn't really think about it. I just said yes immediately because needed to get in.
Amazing. Was
Yeah.
the roles you were applying for, were they all like just anywhere in physio? Was it quite particular for you?
Um, I applied for rotational posts because, well, as a band 5 physio, it would be hard to find a non-rotational post anyway. But I also did apply for band 4 roles as well, which is not needed to be qualified. But I just felt like it was appropriate for me to, go for band 4, go for band 5. Uh, I didn't particularly separate between, let's say, hospital and non-hospital community-based. I just applied to everything. I think my approach at that in the beginning was, even though I knew that I had some specialties sort of on my mind that I maybe wanted to go into one day, my approach was any job will give me knowledge right now, much needed knowledge, and experience. So I just applied for everything. Yeah.
And so you said you had that plan in your head of where you might want to go to in the
Mm,
future.
yeah.
Was that did you have that plan before applying, or was that kind of slowly developing and changing throughout your time as a
Yeah.
band 5?
Mm. I had a plan before applying, then started working as a band 5, and that plan went completely out the window. Um, I wanted to become a musculoskeletal focused physio, right? A specialist in musculoskeletal healthcare. In fact, I did my master's in musculoskeletal healthcare and rehabilitation. So we did a lot of tissue physiology and pathophysiology of MSK tissues, bone, tendon, cartilage, all that stuff. But then when I was in the NHS trust, I was doing rotations. So I went through trauma and orthopedics, and I loved that, which has obviously is an MSK aspect to it, a big MSK aspect to it. I did frailty. I did a bit of acute, sort of like more A&E. I did endocrine. I did a little bit of everything. But then I went into respiratory, and I walked inside ICU, and I left ICU that day, and I came back home, and I remember I told my partner, that's what I want to do. Like, just from one day, I just completely fell in love. Even though this is something that when I was in university, it didn't really appeal to me, like the respiratory area of physiotherapy when I was in uni. Not my interest, or so I thought.
Interesting. What was
Yeah.
the difference? What did you find like the difference between your university studying and then
Mm,
actually in practice?
yeah. Um, I guess you might say that it has to do with like a theory and practice thing. So in university, we started off with a lot of classroom teaching and theory. So I couldn't really visualize what respiratory care was like. But it's not just that, because I did do placements in Greece in respiratory care in ICU, and I didn't at the time. Again, I didn't feel it. I didn't feel like this was an area that I was interested in. So it's not a theory and practical distinction. I think it was I did respiratory as a student in in practical placement, and I think I simply didn't then know enough to appreciate even the practical aspects. So I think what made it even more interesting to me is the fact that I went on to trauma and orthopedics and frailty and A&E and pediatrics and everything else, because I learned so much from all of those areas, you know. Um, and then when I went into ICU a second time, I could appreciate, you know, things about people's body systems and social situations and mental states and everything else that I couldn't really see very clearly. So
Hmm.
yeah, I think it was the fact that it was the second time around, um, and I had a little bit of experience under my belt, which made it click.
Yeah, it's interesting, like especially for students who are going into like a post, like in placement, for example, or if you are a band five rotation, doing your band five rotations now, you might be in an area that is not ticking your boxes, but actually those experiences create those boxes to be ticked later on. Like,
Yeah, that's a great way to put it, isn't it? Yeah. Like
yeah,
you didn't even know there was a box to take, and then suddenly it
exactly.
becomes a
Yeah.
thing. And yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's what it was for me at least. Yeah. Like even to the
Okay,
point
cool.
of shifting me from my master's degree to a completely different direction, you
Mm.
might say. Yeah.
So how long were you doing
Yeah.
the band five rotations for?
Um, so I moved from band five to band six within I think it was about 2 years. So the rotations were around 6 months. Oh, it must have been 2.5 years then, because I remember 5 rotations. And at that point, there was a band six rotational again job that came up, and I went for that. So around the 2.5 year mark, um, I was in a band five role, and I think I also had a sharp learning curve, because again, I didn't do placements in the UK. So my first band five rotation, I was an absolute deer in the headlights. I had no idea how to move, and I just picked up my experience that I brought with me, and I did the best that I could, but I was missing a lot of those essential um, bits of knowledge that you might have gained from doing placements in the UK. So I had to move quite sharp and quite fast in those first few months. Yeah.
And what's this might be obvious to working physios now, but for
Mm,
students listening, what's the difference between working as a band five and to a band six in terms of skill
yeah.
set?
Okay. So I guess a band five physio is somebody who's qualified. So it does mean that they have a basic level of knowledge, obviously, right? And they are qualified to be seeing patients on their own and so on. But I think the main distinction has to do with there's two things really. There's clinical complexity, and then there's also the ability to be independent and supervise others. So a band five will be able to, if I put it in very simple terms, right? What does a band five day look like, and what does a band six day look like? I think that might be useful, right? So a band five, let's say a relatively new band five, they will go into, whether it's a hospital trust or community setting, and they will look at a caseload and they will make some decisions about who they can see and how are they going to prioritize. And they will go and they will start seeing patients and they'll do their notes, and then they'll have a patient or a situation which is a little bit more complex, and they will speak to their band 6 or their band 7 and seek some support, and they'll have that supervision and support. A band 6 will be that person offering that support. So the distinction being that band 6 will do the same thing, the same job, the same patients, the same everything, but when they have that slightly more complex patient, they will be able to maybe deal with it a little bit more independently. That is to say, oh, and you will also, as a band 6, have some band 5s that you might supervise. So you also have to bring in that kind of mindset of an educator, I guess, or, you're kind of passing already the torch to the next generation when you're band 6. But that being said, a band 6 will absolutely need support from time to time. It's not like they are a clinical, a specialist that is entirely independent, right? They will need some support from their band 7 and other band 6s. It's still a learning progress. Yeah.
Bro, and what was the what did you learn during your time as a band 6? What was that? What was your key takeaways from that time?
Yeah, so my band 6 progression, well, my second rotation as a band 6 physio coincided with the pandemic. So, I guess it's difficult because it's what I'm about to say. I don't know how transferable it is until the next time we, touch wood, have a pandemic. But I happened to rotate onto ICU a second time, and that's when COVID-19 happened. So that really defined my stay as a band 6. I guess key takeaway for me, I guess that there's a couple of things. There is an elevated sense of responsibility as a band 6 physio. So I was at that point, especially because of COVID, I was making some decisions that I was running past my band 7, but very quickly I was also making them myself. Decisions that were really quite impactful for people. So things like, when are we, trying to get somebody off a ventilator? When are we starting the process of weaning them off the tracheostomy? How do we engage with external teams around speech and swallowing therapy, and making those decisions alongside the MDT, but without the immediate support from a specialist band 7 or 8. And I think that for me was a landmark point. That's when I started feeling that my knowledge was different, and that sense of responsibility, because my decisions it wasn't simply, do we move today or tomorrow? It was more decisions that can impact somebody for months in advance. And that realization made me, I guess, kind of start to think a little bit more deeply about concepts like person-centered care, shared decision-making, effective communication within an MDT, and how all these things impact the patient. I guess it's the meta elements of care, not just the direct physiology of it.
That's
That was
interesting.
yeah.
So you just say it was more physiology within band 5, not saying it was strictly just that, but it was more
Yeah.
of physiology in band 5, and then you started to zoom out a little bit more in band 6.
I think so, yeah. It's an odd, yeah, that's you're describing it very well. It's an odd feeling because you're both zooming in more and zooming out more. You're zooming
Yeah,
in more into the physio, but you're also zooming out more into the sort of social, mental, psychosocial elements of care. Yeah.
that's really interesting.
Yeah.
So where did your career go from band 6 physio then?
Yeah. So around I didn't stay as a band 6 for very long, because then a band 7 position came up, and I applied for that. That's when the real imposter syndrome kicked in. But I applied for that and I did well. And at that point it was a static role within respiratory care. And I'll be honest, I didn't feel ready at the start, but I had a really, really good support from my supervisor. They encouraged me to go for it, and they were there as a I could bounce my ideas off before the interview. Did well in the interview. Band 7 static within respiratory care. And then that was really, I guess, when everything I just mentioned as a band 6 kind of went into a little bit even higher level. At that point, you become more responsible for how the day-to-day running of, a service might be, especially in absence of your clinical lead. So you do still have a clinical therapies lead, but in their absence, you deputize. So it's thinking about those decisions that have to do not just with one patient at a time, but across wards, and how you maintain the level of care across wards. So that was a different kind of challenge. And I stayed within that role for some time before my career took me in a very, very different area, which was education. Um, it's not that I didn't enjoy the role. It's not, I didn't really go into higher education because I wanted to leave that band seven role. I actually really, really liked it. And in fact, I miss it dearly. But higher education had a different kind of pull on me as well. And I guess I just became very curious. So my local sort of university uh, came up with his role, and I went for that as well. So that's where I've been since for the past few years.
What made you want to go for the role within education?
I think, well, this is personal as well, right? Because when I was younger, even before physiotherapy, before all of this, when I was in school, people would sometimes say to me like, "Oh, you'd be really good as a teacher." I guess because I was quite interested in science and interested in things and people and how they work and how things function. Um, and I remember like even as a little kid, I would go into my brother's room or my dad's on the living room or something, and I'd be like, "Oh, did you know this is how this works? I just read this," and just give them fun facts. I guess I'm just really interested in stuff. So I had that feedback, and I was always curious to see whether, as an educator, I do well. I had a student um, on their placement while I was a band seven in respiratory care, and that was my first student. I didn't have one as a band six, interestingly, even though most people do. And it was that interaction with that student. It was me teaching somebody else all of the things that I knew about that made me see how rewarding that was, because they were keen. And it's like you give somebody a little hint or a little bit of knowledge, and then it's like a secondary impact. Like I can have an impact on a patient, but then if I teach my student, then I go see a patient and my student goes sees a patient, and then we have an impact on two people.
Mhm.
And that became quite addictive to me. I think that's why I became addicted to that feeling.
Sharing the knowledge and doing
Yeah,
greater
yeah,
good.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Mhm.
Perfect. So we're gonna have to wrap it up shortly. Try
Yeah.
and keep these conversations quite limited.
Yeah.
But the major question that I got from students before this conversation, and you briefly touched on it,
Mm.
dealing with imposter syndrome. Are there any tips that you could give to students and to physios that are maybe going through it at the moment?
Yeah. Um, Look, there's two sides to this. With imposter syndrome, the first thing that you need to know is that it is definitely not just you. Everybody has that. And most people just put a very good face to kind of hide that. Um, the other thing is that you do need, in our healthcare roles, you do need to have a level of safety. So if you're aware of your safety basics, which in physiotherapy care might be things like the concept of a red flag and things like that. Um, if you feel like you have a level of safety, then everything else is doable, fixable. You can discuss it, you can take time away from it. There is that baseline of safety, I must say. But I think, through placements, through discussions with seniors, if you're honest about your knowledge, I don't think that safety issue, or that it is an issue. Like you'll go in and you'll know the basics, right? But after that, you just need to remember that everything is fixable, everything is doable. You have time, you have people to help you. Um, Especially in those early roles, band five physio. Don't think that just because you came from student and you're now a band five, that suddenly now people expect you to be independent or fully independent. A band five physio will still need support, and a band six physio will know this. They will expect this. So you go to them, you speak to them. Um, and in fact, it's also very important, and I'll wrap up with this, is just to be aware that healthcare professionals, we make mistakes all the time. Um, all the time, even a very experienced one. And I think what's important, especially from a patient perspective, because I spoke a lot about the physio perspective today, but just from a patient perspective and a service user point of view, I think it's a very strong move if you're able to accept and speak to a patient about your mistakes or even your areas the things that you don't know. And I think that tends to go down better than we think when you can say, I'm not quite sure. I'll get back to you on that, for example. Yeah.
That's really good. That's a really good piece of advice there.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining today.
Yeah. Thank you very much
Perfect.
for
And
the discussion.
no, it's great. Thank you so much, Alex.
Take care.